There are also Muslim groups who call upon fellow Muslims like the Tablighi Jamaat to learn more about their own faith and to join them in their own individual way of preaching. At the same time, many of us want to learn more about our religion, to educate ourselves, which is actually the mission of my life, and to answer some of the questions that come in our own mind, which are raised by our children, our neighbors, people sitting in the audience here. In other words, we are all in one sense or the other callers to the religion, da'i. Our approach and methodology may be different, based upon our personality, our education, our objective, our audience. So I will talk about this first thing that, as I said, I call the lost art of speaking. Some technology problem. I'm not connected to the internet probably. Okay. So listening is a gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I want to make a distinction between hearing and listening. Hearing is an ability that's given by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not just to human beings, but to every living being, actually, if you look at it. Even the trees listen. We may not feel it, but maybe the stones also listen. As I said, "Diwaron ke bhi kaan hote hain," even the walls have ears. In Arabic, the root word of both listening and hearing is the same, sama'a, sin, mim, and ain. And the Quran uses the two derivatives differently. So I wanted to focus on this distinction first, and we'll come back to that. So Allah is Al-Wahhab. He has given us so many blessings that we just take some of them for granted and don't even think that they are special talents, special abilities that are given to human beings, some more than the others. So the distinction that the Quran makes between the simple act of hearing, like most of you are hearing to me, and listening. And it's the beauty of the Arabic language, and that's one of the reasons why the Quran was revealed in the Arabic language. There can be other reasons too. So let's first look at this verse, very common, very famous verse. وَإِذَا قُرِئَ الْقُرْآنُ فَاسْتَمِعُوا لَهُ وَأَنصِتُوا لَعَلَّكُمْ تُرْحَمُونَ. And if you have been paying attention to my style when I discuss Quranic verses, that the first step is to deconstruct a verse which has more than one statement in it, and try to understand each of these statements individually and then synthesize them and come up with the overall message. So actually there are three parts to this verse. First is وَإِذَا قُرِئَ الْقُرْآنُ فَاسْتَمِعُوا لَهُ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not say وَإِذَا قُرِئَ الْقُرْآنُ فَاسْمَعُوا لَهُ. The English translation will probably be the same. When the Quran is recited, listen to it, hear it. But there is a distinction between sama'a, isma'u, and istami'u. So the Arabic words which fall into this category, verbal category of ifta'al, have a meaning of making effort. For example, imtihan is from the same category. And we all know for imtihan, you have to make an effort. You cannot just walk into an examination center and pass it. You have to make an effort before that. So sami'a is whether you want it or not, words or sounds fall into your ears or our ears and we listen to it. But istima is when we intentionally pay attention to what is being said, not just to hear a noise, not just to hear the words, but what lies behind the words. So that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has used this thing. When the Quran is being recited, pay attention to it in order to understand, not just the meanings of the word, but the mafhum of the word. Meaning of mane and mafhum, two different Arabic words. Mane would be a simple translation, listen to it. But what's the mafhum? Try to understand it. Make an effort to understand it. The second, wa'ansetu, and be quiet. Now again, in Arabic there are different words for the same meaning. So one word is sukut or sakata, to be quiet. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't say faskutu. He used a different word, which means something different than just being quiet. But there are two types of noises. One is a noise which is external to us. We hear it. But if we are engaged in something very important, our ears, our mind filters out this external noise. But then there is an internal noise. That when we are listening to others or hearing others, when we are talking to others, we are actually talking to ourselves inside as well. So there is an inner noise going on, which prevents us from really paying attention to what the speaker is saying and to understand his or her point of view. We hear in order to answer back. Most of the time when somebody is talking, we are actually already formulating our own ideas of how we will respond based upon what we have already known before, a preformed opinion that we want to express, rather than listen to a different point of view and then answer. So here is a distinction here when the Quran is being recited, istami'u, pay attention, listen, while removing the inner noise, whatever other bag and baggage you have, and pay attention to the meaning of what is being said, the understanding. لَعَلَّكُمْ تُرْحَمُونَ, perhaps you will be shown mercy. That's the third aspect. Why is it important? Why does it connect with the first two? So the purpose of the listening to the Quran, hearing the Quran, is to understand the message, to filter out our inner noise, to listen to the voice of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then in the light of it, act. And that action will qualify for us for the rahmat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Which means simply hearing to the recitation, the beautiful recitation of the Quran is good, not enough. Understanding the meaning of the Quran, one step better. But the next step where you really benefit, where you qualify for the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is to act upon it. So simple statement, 3 parts, understand each one individually and then come up with an overall meaning. So now why is listening important? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when he first disclosed himself to Musa alayhi salatu wasalam and talked to him, listen to what he says. He says, وَأَنَا أَخْتَرْتُكَ, I have chosen you. Of all the people, you are the one that I have chosen. And if you look at, as I mentioned, the word Arabic category, ifti'al, from which istima is an imtihan. Akhtartuka is from ikhtiyar. Same category, verbal category, making an effort. Allah doesn't make an effort, but He's using this word that, yes, I know there are many people in this world, but you are the one that I'm intentionally selecting for my message. Fastami'u. Again, not here, fasma, fastami'. Pay attention, lima yuha, to what is being revealed to you. So that's the Quranic thing. What are the characteristics of being a person who is a good listener? Who will look at it through the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And there are several aspects to that. One aspect in the language of the computer will be input, processing, and output. So when you hear me talking, you're getting an input. Before you respond to me, you have to process what I'm saying. Try to understand my point of view. Then comes the output. But oftentimes when we are engaged in dialogue, the middle part of processing is totally removed. The input is barely perceived. The output is ready to come out. Sometimes oftentimes we don't even let the speaker finish before we say our own point of view. And this is perhaps the idea behind the khutbah, that nobody is allowed to talk. Listen to the speaker, try to understand. If he is wrong, you can corner him afterwards, you can correct him afterwards, nothing wrong with it. The second aspect are the 3 E's of listening. First is listen without ego. If somebody is saying something that you don't believe in, or you are vehemently opposed to it, your ego will prevent you from listening to that person, and he may be right, he or she. So remove your ego first. The second is listening to the emotion of a person. When somebody is angry at you or somebody is showing some emotion, there is an inner turmoil that is going on inside that individual. And we'll give some examples from the life of the Prophet. So pay attention to the emotions. And the third will be the E of empathy. Listen with empathy. Empathy doesn't mean, I'm sorry that you're going through this. Empathy may mean, I've been through this too. Or I'm going through the same thing too. You connect, that's how you connect. So now let's look at some of the examples from the life of the Prophet ﷺ, and then I will share a couple of personal incidents about listening. So the first word is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Prophet ﷺ used to listen a lot. And sometimes people say things that will really make your blood boil, that you want to just burst out. But Allah's command to the Prophet ﷺ was, فَبِمَا رَحْمَةٍ مِّنَ اللَّهِ. That, O Prophet ﷺ, it is exclusively because of the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. لِنْتَ لَهُمْ. Now if you pay attention how these words are pronounced, even if you don't know Arabic, you can get the meaning. لِنْتَ لَهُمْ. Softenings. Leniency. Lean in Arabic and leniency in English are the same word. That it is out of the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that you have been given a lenient character. That even when people come to you, ignorant people, your enemies, they swear at you, they hurt your feelings, you still show leniency to them. And that's a rahmat from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. فَلَوْ كُنْتَ فَضًّا غَلِيظًا. Even if you don't know the Arabic, فَضًّا غَلِيظًا, the way it is said, means harshness, hard-heartedness, stubbornness. There are two aspects to the nature of a human being, leniency and hard-headedness or stubbornness. For a leader, it's very important. As I mentioned, this khutbah is about the art of listening, especially for leaders, that how you listen. That when somebody comes and talks to you nonsense, how you control yourself. That's a leniency. It's a given quality, but it has to be learned as well. That if you are harsh, if you are hard-hearted, لَنْ فَضُّ مِنْ حَوْلِكَ, they would have run away from you. So if you're not a good listener and you want to convince others of your point of view, it will not work. You have to listen, you have to show flexibility, leniency, good character. That's one thing. So the example from the life of the Prophet ﷺ is that a woman comes to the Prophet ﷺ, and this is actually a landmark decision, like say a court decision, which is a landmark, that there was an old Arab custom that a husband could tell his wife, I'm just quoting, you are like the back of my mother, which basically meant, it was called zihar. Zihar means back, which basically meant that the woman is neither divorced, nor does she have any sort of relationship with her husband. She's simply hanging in the air. And that would happen. So there was a lady, and her name is given Khawla bint Thalaba. She stood up this time. Her husband said, and he said, I'm not going to take it from you. Because these were old customs, we had no recourse to anybody. There was no judge. There was no opportunity for a woman to challenge what was being done to them. But now I have a person who will listen to me. Okay. Now I want you to look at this verse. And as I mentioned, the Arabic for hearing is sama, and the Arabic for listening is istama. They're all from the same root. In this one verse that I am reciting to you, this derivative is used 3 times, which highlights the importance of listening and hearing. Okay. So if it qad sami Allah, first thing, Allah has already heard. O Prophet, before she has come to you, she spoke to me. Whether she spoke in words or whether just a thought came into her mind that this is a wrong practice, I have recourse to Allah now. So qad sami Allah qawla allati tujadiluka. Allah has already listened to the statement of the lady who is arguing with you fi zawjiha, about her husband. That was unheard of in that society, that a woman could go to someone else and complain about her husband. It was not just a complaint about an individual husband, it was about all the husbands. It was a custom that she was talking about. But tashtaki ilallah. Now that's part. Allah is saying, but tashtaki ilayka. She's complaining to you. Her complaint is to Allah, but she's discussing with you. Okay? Because she knows that you are the Prophet of Allah, but the law has to be changed by Allah. Wallahu yasma'u. Second time, Allah is listening, tahawurakuma, the dialogue between the two. Now believe me or not, I never thought it this way until I started preparing for this khutbah a while ago. That when I'm talking to my wife, Allah is listening. The thought had never occurred to me. That if I'm giving the khutbah, Allah is listening. That I'm talking to my patients, my staff, my children, my grandchildren, my neighbor, my friends. Allah is listening to that conversation. He's judging me. That thought had never occurred to me. It was a moment of awakening for me. There was another moment that I'll talk about. Inna Allah Sami'un Basir. Allah is always hearing. He's seeing everything. So in this thing, it's Allah himself who is listening to the conversation. And he's telling the Prophet, you have to listen to this lady too. She's arguing, she's right. And this custom has to go away now. That's the power of one woman standing up in that society. No, I will say no this time. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed a punishment for the husbands in this situation, not for the woman. The next, as I'm talking about empathy and all that, is there was Jabir bin Abdullah radiallahu ta'ala. He was a young guy. He and his father Abdullah radiallahu ta'ala were both very early Muslims in Medina. And the Battle of Uhud came, and the father Abdullah was martyred. Now Jabir was left in a way yatim, but he also had under his guardianship several sisters. I think one narration mentioned he had 7 sisters. So he used to take care of them, try to understand the emotion of that young guy. A battle in which Muslims lost 70 of their martyrs, and his father has also been martyred. And at that time, many shuhada were buried in one grave, and his father was put in one grave, and Jabir didn't want it. He actually later on he complained to the Prophet, and the Prophet allowed him to dig out the grave of the dead body of his father and bury somewhere else. But at that moment, he was so upset. He was clinging on to the shroud of his father, and the Sahaba were just rebuking him, don't do this and this and that. And here comes the Prophet. He moves everybody aside. He stands with Jabir. Just let him finish. All his emotions have died down. Then he gives him the advice. So he does not interrupt him. This guy is going through a lot. This is not the time to repudiate him, to rebuke him, to speak harshly to him. Let him vent out his emotions. Then he will listen to you. So that was another. Another incident is about an older guy. His name was Amr ibn Jamu. He was an old guy and he was lame. He couldn't walk. So when the Battle of Uhud came, he said, I'm going to fight. And his son said, you're not going to fight. He said, no, I'm going to fight. No, you're not going to fight. So there was this tension going on between children and father, and ultimately they come to the Prophet. The Prophet first listens to the son. He said, no, here's our father. He's old. He's lame. We don't think he should go. He said, okay, now let me listen to your father. And it brings tears to my eyes. He said, no, I cannot even walk properly on this earth, but I want to walk in Jannah. And my way of walking in Jannah is through Shahada. The Prophet told his sons, you are exempted. But if this is your wish, you do. And he tells the sons, your father still has the right to do that. And this is what we use in medical profession, like medical proxy and all that. Sometimes children come and say, or even spouses. But we say, if that patient is still mentis composis, he is still in possession of mental senses, he or she has the right to make a decision. The healthcare proxy comes afterwards. So that was an important point that he did. Another incident is when the Prophet ﷺ was actually in Mecca, and his message was intensifying, and people wanted to persecute, pressurize, persuade. So he said, what can we do with this gentleman? There is nothing we can do to budge him. So there was a very good speaker among them, a leader, his name was Khutba. So they said, Khutba, why don't you go and try to convince him? And you may have read this thing when you were a student, that we can put moon in your one hand and sun in the other hand. You can marry any woman you want. You can get any money you want. You can be our leader. So that's the story. So Khutba comes, and the Prophet knows what he said. So when he comes to the Prophet, how he addresses, he says, Ya Aba Walid. Those who know Arabic, it's a very sign of respect that you call somebody not by their name but by their kunya. He says, Ya Aba Walid, why have you come? So I've come to talk to you. So why don't we sit down and I will listen to you. So Khutba goes on and on and on and on, not interrupted at least once by the Prophet ﷺ. And after he had done, the words come from Ibn Ishaq, wa Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam yastame'u. As I mentioned, Samia and Istima are different. The Prophet kept listening to it. After he said, Aqad faraqta ya Abu Walid. Oh Abu Walid, are you done? Is that all you have to say? Is there anything more to say? I can still listen to you. And he said, Naam. So then the Prophet said, Fasma minni. Now listen to me. And then he recited the Quran with ayah from Surah Sajda and said, Abu Walid, did you hear my answer? The answer from the Quran? He said, yeah. I said, this is it. This is my answer. I'm not going to change my position. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم ولذكر الله أكبر. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد اللهم بارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. So we'll make dua for Brother Zahir Qadri, who passed away yesterday in India. He was the uncle of Khalida Sheikh and Shahzad Pathan. اللهم اغفر له وارحمه وادخله في جنة الفردوس معه أعوذ من عذاب القبر ومن عذاب النار. We all know the calamity that's going on in Morocco and Libya with floods and earthquakes and so forth. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala help all of those people. The masjid is collecting some money and donations for them, so please be generous and donate to them. So I want to give one more hadith before I move on to my personal experiences about listening. So, and I just read it in English. So Ali radiallahu ta'ala mentioned that the Prophet ﷺ sent me to Yemen. So when people from Yemen had become Muslims, the Prophet ﷺ would send his representative to them. So he was sending Ali and he said, Ya Rasulullah, you are sending me to a people who are much older than I am, much more seasoned, much more experienced. I'm a young guy. If two people come to me and ask me to pass judgment, what will I do? How can I decide? And the answers of the Prophet was, he first put his hand on the chest of Ali radiallahu ta'ala. Now, if you read several other hadiths, there are different aspects of the body language, which is part of the listening of the Prophet. Sometimes he will put his hand on the head of someone, sometimes on the shoulder of someone, sometimes on the chest of someone. So he's putting his hand on the chest of Ali radiallahu ta'ala. And there is a reason you have to think about it. Why the chest? Why not the shoulder this time? Why not the head this time? Ali radiallahu ta'ala was suffering from anxiety. He was anxious. The anxiety is here. If you put your hand on somebody's chest, calm down, that it really works. There is something that happens. And that action calmed Ali radiallahu ta'ala. There is another Arabic thing, inshirahu sadr, opening of the chest. So in a way, the Prophet was making dua, oh Allah, open up his chest so that he can face this situation. Then he made dua, he said, Allahumma sabbit lisana. Make his tongue steadfast, wa'bi qalba, and guide his heart. And then he gave an advice to Ali radiallahu ta'ala. He said, Ya Ali, idha jalasa ilayka al-khasman, fala taqdi bainahuma. Oh Ali, when two people come and want you to judge between them, they are arguing with each other, don't just sit down and don't give a decision. Hatta tasma'a, word samya again, until you hear min al-akhari kama sameta min al-awwal. Until you have listened to the second one as much as you have listened to the first one. Listening to make a judgment. Listen to both parties. So what I want to talk to you about, share a couple of my own personal experiences. One is that when patients come to see doctors, they are either given a survey at the same time to send it back or send it afterwards, or they are given a link. Many times I sit on some quality control committees and so forth, then oftentimes the complaint is, the doctor didn't listen to us. The doctor didn't have time for me. And sometimes when I talk to my patients and say, do you have any complaints? They say, yeah, I have many complaints, but nobody listens. Many times I hear this thing, nobody listens. And unfortunately now with the electronic medical records, we are focusing more on the computer than on the patient. I really don't like this system, but sometimes I just put everything aside, sit down and say, I'm listening to you, just go ahead and tell me. So they don't care how many degrees you have or how well dressed you are or what kind of English you speak. Doctor didn't have time to me. He was rushed. He didn't listen. Listening, you can make a diagnosis most often by just simply listening to the patient. So listening is my own experience. This is many years ago. I was young at that time. It was weekend, very busy weekend. I was covering for everybody. I'm writing notes and the operators page me. I pick up the phone. There is a relative of a patient that I've never seen. He belongs to one of my colleagues. And that guy was like a talkative guy. He kept on talking, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. I have to rush. So I've just tried to cut him short. Can you come to the point? How can I help you? And he said something that woke me up as if I had smelled some strong coffee. He said, doctor, if you don't listen to me, how can you help me? I literally woke up. First time in my life, no teacher ever taught me this thing. No textbook ever taught me. If I don't listen, how can I help my patients? The power of listening. And I kept listening to him and I thank him for providing with me that opportunity to learn something from him and to carry it in my practice. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us better listeners first, Then speakers, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the ability to listen to his words. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the ability to listen to the words of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to learn from his example, to listen to each other without getting insulted, without feeling less important, paying attention to everybody and addressing the emotions of everybody. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us better individuals from today than we were yesterday or before we came here today. It's for me as well as for everybody. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار ربنا لا تزغ قلوبنا بعد إذ هديتنا وهب لنا من لدنك رحمة إنك أنت الوهاب. Just a little piece, interesting piece. When I gave this khutbah to ICW a couple of weeks ago, I actually pointed towards a psychiatrist friend of mine and I said, here is the best listener in our community. He listens from morning to evening. When I went home, he had sent me a WhatsApp message about a doctor who was shouting. It was a video clip. How much he has to listen to nonsense from his patients from morning to evening. But again, listening is something which is extremely important. إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون وأقيموا الصلاة.
الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح قد قامت الصلاة وقد قامت الصلاة الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله
لا إله إلا الله. Make your line straight. الله أكبر. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين